Did we come from monkeys, or is someone monkeying with evidence? Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Welcome to this episode. We're going to be talking about a very, very, very hot, controversial topic today, right? And this is something which, has affected many of us. Many Muslims are asking questions about this. Many atheists are pushing this, and that is Darwinian evolution, or the Darwinian mechanism and evolution, and all of these different things, right? We're going to touch upon this. But first and foremost, I want to give credit to brother Sabur Ahmed, who spent 6 months putting this content together that I've been able to bring to you guys today. And this is phenomenal research, right? This is up-to-date, cutting-edge stuff. So let's get into it. First and foremost, let's lay down the backdrop of this whole discussion. We live in a time today where atheists are pushing and promoting the idea of Darwinian evolution or Darwinian mechanism, the idea that we all go back down to a single origin, and through the process of evolution guided by natural selection, we have come to be today as human beings. We've evolved from lower life forms. We have come from a different type of ape, monkey being, whatever you want to call it. There's many ways of looking at it. But that's the reality, they say, right? That's what they say. And for Muslims, generally this is an issue, because we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, tells us in the Quran that He created Adam alayhi salam with His own hands, right? So how do we reconcile these two things? How do we deal with this reality, or a supposed reality that science is presenting us today, which is that we evolved from lower life forms? Well, we're going to touch upon this, and the first thing I want to do is remove some of these misconceptions. I want to touch upon some basic concepts we have before we begin. Number one, I call it the SAD analogy, or call it SAD. SAD stands for S, speculations, A, assumptions, and D, disputes and disagreements. SAD is basically what I want you to remember, because this is what's happening within the community, the evolutionary community. There are assumptions, there are speculations, and there are disagreements. And also a key thing I want us to keep in mind, as we've seen in previous episodes, is this base concept, or this idea that science is revisable, as we've seen. This is a fact. There's no denying this. You can go to any philosopher of science, any scientist, and check with him. And if he's sincere and he's honest, he will tell you this. Science is revisable. And the second point I want you to remember is the Darwinian mechanism. And the reason I'm distinguishing between Darwinian mechanism and evolution, we're going to touch upon this. There's a reason, but we'll get into this. But the Darwinian mechanism is also, therefore, revisable, because it's a product of science. Okay? So science is revisable, and therefore the Darwinian mechanism is no exception. It also is revisable. Okay? And we're going to go from here. So number one, what I want us to realize is that we're going to stick to some key principles right now, right? Because there is a lot of controversy regarding this. So what I'm going to be doing is this. I'm not going to be quoting any creationists. I'm not going to be quoting any Muslim professors or theologians. Everyone we quote or cite is going to be academic. It's going to be a secular academic, a non-Muslim, an atheist. It's mainstream information that we're going to be touching upon. We're not going to go into some crazy books written by some crazy professors or scientists that no one really credits or takes into consideration. And most of the stuff we're going to be citing, if not everything, is from peer-reviewed journals, right? And that's the cream of the crop when it comes to science, okay, these journals. So the first thing I want to touch upon is this. There is a difference between evolution and the Darwinian mechanism. What atheists do, or generally scientists do as well, both of these things are conflated. When you say Darwinism, or the Darwinian mechanism, or Darwinian evolution, and you say evolution in general, it's one and the same thing in today's thinking. But the reality is they're two different things. And we need to make this distinction first and foremost, because this is key, very, very important. Evolution is an observation, okay? So adaptations that take place within species and things, it can be observed in a laboratory. It has been observed. That's not a problem. Muslims don't have a problem with this. But the Darwinian mechanism is a theory which explains, or tries to explain, these observations, and gives this a whole criteria of how human beings evolved eventually, right? So they're two separate things. Darwinian mechanism is a theory which tries to explain this observation, which is evolution, okay? So this is the main key thing we need to understand and distinguish before we move on. The other thing we need to realize, brothers and sisters, what happens in mainstream schools and academia is something called bait and switch. Sometimes it's deliberate, sometimes it's not deliberate. Okay, it just happens because of the way we've been brought up and the concepts we've been taught through our educational processes. What I mean by bait and switch is this. A student goes up to a professor and he says, is evolution true? The professor looks at him and he says, yes, the Darwinian mechanism, the Darwinian evolution is true. And when the professor is saying evolution is true, what he's thinking about is something he may have observed in a laboratory under the microscope, right? Some adaptations taking place and so on. But when the child hears this from the professor, he's thinking about humans evolving from lower life forms, okay? And this is a problem. We need to really define what we're talking about here. So this is the bait and switch. We need to make sure we're careful about this, that we're not talking, they're two different things and we're not talking about the same thing. So the first thing we want to look into is the general problems with the Darwinian mechanism, okay? And that is number one, the tree of life. And this is something very common. We've all heard of this before. Darwin's tree of life, which explains how we went from that first cell all the way to a modern human being. And it's basically, it starts off as a trunk, and then it grows into these branches which branch out to all of these different species. This tree of life, most of us, when we hear about this and when we're taught about this, it's taught as a fact, right? Now, first and foremost, as we've discussed before, science does not deal with absolute facts. But we'll say fact here from the perspective of a scientific fact which can be revised. But here's the thing. Many evolutionary experts today, they don't believe in the tree of life idea. They say we don't have enough evidence to claim that it's a tree. Some of them, such as Craig Venter, a leading expert, he says, well, no, it's more of a bush of life, right? It's more muddled than we first thought it was. Some scientists reject the whole idea altogether. So this whole idea of there being a tree of life as being a fact and that everyone's agreeing about this idea, no. Amongst the experts within the community, there are disagreements. They disagree about this concept. They have various different ideas. Like we said, some say it's a tree, some say it's a bush, some say it's a hedge, some say it doesn't exist altogether, right? So there are disagreements, there are disputes, and there are lots of speculations when it comes to this. The second thing is the idea of natural selection acting upon random mutations, which is a key concept within the Darwinian mechanism. Again, this isn't an agreed upon concept. Not every single scientist, evolutionary scientist agrees upon this. For example, Lynn Sagan, she disagrees with this. She says it doesn't have the explanatory power. This whole idea of natural selection acting upon these random mutations, which resulted in all of this. So again, there's disputes and there's disagreements. A third view is that of the gene-centered view popularized by Richard Dawkins, right? Again, this runs into many problems. He, for example, firstly, Richard Dawkins has this to say in his book. He says, we are survival machines, robot vehicles blindly programmed to preserve the selfish molecule known as genes. This is a truth which still fills me with astonishment. Well, it's not going to fill him with astonishment for long because you have other leading experts in the field like E.O. Wilson who completely disagree with this. And Richard Dawkins and E.O. Wilson actually went back and forth regarding this point. And E.O. Wilson said, well, you know what, I'm not gonna have a discussion or a disagreement with a journalist, right? Because Richard Dawkins is now a journalist. He's not really a scientist within the field, practicing. So the point again is disagreements. There are many disagreements amongst the experts regarding these core, fundamental realities of the Darwinian mechanism, such as the tree of life, the gene-centered view and all of these things, natural selection acting from random mutations. There are many disagreements. So what this shows us, well, the experts are not agreeing upon these core concepts within the Darwinian mechanism. So there is some problems there, which the mainstream don't really get to know because we don't look into this much. Another thing I want to look at is sociological problems with the Darwinian mechanism, right? The whole idea that we are selfish as human beings and we selfishly want to promote our genes, and this whole evolutionary Darwinian mechanism is based on propagating your DNA, right? It's about propagating your DNA. It's all about survival. This is the key sort of idea behind this all. But the reality is, sociologically, all we need to do is go out there and see human nature, human behavior. It's contradictory to this because we are selfless. We care about others. Many times, you can go to YouTube and see many clips of people sacrificing their lives, putting themselves in danger for somebody else, right? We're kind. We take care of others. We look out for others. We give charity. And when we give charity, according to the Darwinian mechanism, we should be feeling very bad. Everything about our nature should feel terrible about doing this because we want to avoid it. It's about us, our survival. But instead, what happens when we give charity? We feel good. Atheists feel good when they give charity, right? So the point here is this: our sociological behavior, how we act as human beings, goes totally in contradiction to the Darwinian mechanism, right? We should be selfish, we should be thinking about ourselves, our own survival, not caring about others, but we do the total opposite. And when we do the opposite, as human beings, we feel good. We feel compelled to do more, right? So there's something here that doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. This Darwinian mechanism doesn't make sense from a sociological perspective at all, right? So, brothers and sisters, we're going to conclude on this point. Stay tuned for the next episode because we're going to look into some other problems with this mechanism, give you some practical real life examples of fossils when they were made out to be one thing but they turned out to be something else. And we're going to look at the if you like, the philosophical reality of this mechanism, this Darwinian mechanism, and what's going on underneath the surface. There's more than just science here, guys. There's a conspiracy going on almost. We're going to look into this. We're going to look further. So hopefully you guys have benefited from this. Jazakallah khair. Until next time, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.